I am afraid I will have to speak in English. I hope you can all hear me. I want to thank you, first of all, for the invitation. It's a great delight and honor to work there and also to present the work that we're doing abroad, especially at your museum in Hungary. Let me quickly go to a screen share, and I propose to give a short presentation about the lessons that we have learned from this dreadful pandemic that is not yet over. So let me quickly go to screen share. So what I want to talk about is really what we are obliged to learn from this pandemic, because it is often said, never waste a good crisis. These things happen, and if they are not to be wasted, we have to learn from them. And we have to take from them very strong lessons. In this case, I am very grateful to COVID for several reasons. Because I think we can finally say that some of the logics that were driving the museum field, which at some point was called the museum business, some of the logics that were forcing us to make certain decisions, logics that were imposed by public opinion, journalists, politicians, clearly were exposed to be faulty during the pandemic. The first thing we saw was obviously that our dependence that some museums created on mass tourism or on blockbuster exhibitions were completely unsustainable. Obviously, if you build a business plan based on bringing in many people, when you can't open your doors, your business plan collapses. On the other hand, what we learned was that museums didn't disappear when the doors closed. And that is a huge revelation to some, because recall that generally speaking, in the past 40 years, museums have been measured by two things. Museums have been measured by the quality of the collection. So a good museum is equal to a good collection. But of course, that never made sense, because the collection has its own value, artists have their own value, and art has its own value. Whether it's shown in IKEA or in the Parthenon, it doesn't really matter. The collection is independent of the museum. And the second error that we perpetuated for 40 years, in fact, since the invention of mass tourism, was that a good museum was a museum with many visitors. By these measures, let's say, the Uffizi is a great museum. It has undeniably a fantastic collection. It has undeniably more visitors than it can handle. But what COVID showed us was actually neither of those measures are legitimate measures. The museums were closed almost for a year. We had no visitors, but nobody can tell me that the Uffizi was a less good museum or the Louvre was a less good museum because it had no visitors. Visitor numbers weren't the measure of the quality of the museum. But neither could we even say that it was the collection that made the museum great. Now, a great collection has its own value. But what we saw was when museums had to move online and they had to suddenly learn how to communicate to the community they serve, the people who wanted access to beauty and wanted access to artworks, wanted access to research material, they suddenly realized that actually it wasn't even the collection that defined their quality. A museum was a great museum because it did things with its collection. So this was a fundamental revelation that we learned in COVID, is that museums should not be measured in terms of how many visitors they have. They should not be measured solely in terms of the quality of the collection, which in fact is a historical fact and not something the museum has much to do with. But what we have learned is that while we were closed, with the doors closed, that museums actually have to be measured by what they do. Now, the closure also forced us to ask questions of ourselves, because we said, well, if the museum isn't about coming in through the doors and looking at our paintings or looking at our scientific objects or looking at our natural history specimens, well, what are museums for? Are they only valid if people come to see our collections? And then we had to say, obviously, well, what can we offer online? Now, the interesting question that arises then is, when we provide our museum, when we do what we do in museums, what do we do in museums? We interpret, we study, we create links to new communities, we inspire, we console. I mean, a museum has an enormous range of activities whereby it creates value in different ways for different publics. That's the whole point. So the real question started to arise, well, what is it we should be doing online? The doors are closed, we can't let anybody in. So what should we be doing online? Now, the majority of museums opted to illustrate. Let's show people what they will be able to see when they can come back. Let's show people what we have. Let's have our curators wandering about the halls in their pajamas and showing things, pointing at pictures that people can't really see properly. Now, in this sense, I think that we could do better. So let me quickly go back to the main argument for me, is that I think that what we learned during the lockdown was something we knew already, which is essentially the museum is what it does and not what it has. A museum is everything we do to create value for our community. A museum is the community's big house. Yeah, it's where we keep everything that we can't have at our own houses. I can have art in my own home, but I can't have a Caravaggio. So where do we as a society put the things we can't have individually? We put them in our big house. Now, what's important there is that the museum's collections then are accessible to the whole community, which means it doesn't just belong to people like me, privileged, white, bourgeois. It belongs to everybody. It belongs to Syrian immigrants. It belongs to the people who came in the boats from Libya. It belongs to people living in the country. It belongs to the community. It represents both a shared identity and it represents a collective memory. In terms of shared identity, it belongs to people who have grown up with it. But in terms of collective memory, if a newly arrived refugee from Syria, from Lebanon, from Ethiopia, comes to the Brera and sees the marvelous Caravaggio's extraordinary painting of the supper at Emmaus, when two citizens meet a stranger on the road and invite him to dinner instead of throwing stones at him. So if they come to see that painting, it's their Caravaggio. It's their Caravaggio too. It becomes part of their collective memory, and it becomes part of their identity in the community. And I think that's where we have to say that the museum's work is to create value for its community as that community changes, because the demography of that community changes all the time. A museum has to be there when we need it, not when we need visitors, but when our community needs us. A community needs us at different parts of their lives. They need us when they're school children to come and learn. They need us when they want to be inspired. They might need a museum where they need to take their girlfriend out on a date to show how cultured they are. We have programs that link to hospices, end-of-life hospices, because often the families of somebody who is confronting terminal illness need a break from the awful recognition that they will lose somebody they love. So we offer them a free ticket to the museum. They come for consolation. They come for different reasons. It is important in museums that we recognize the diversity of the reasons people come to us. But fundamentally, we serve our community as a site of collective identity. Now, let me just quickly take you through Brera. I'll just show you some pictures to show you what we're doing. That was a tour by flashlight. This is our founder, Napoleon. We were founded in 1809 by Napoleon. We've reinstalled the entire collections with labels of different kinds, by different voices, by authors, by curators, by children. So we have a very strong approach to the experience of art. We have labels for families and children. We have labels written by famous authors like Orhan Pamuk. We have tactile labels of at least 3 kinds. We have olfactory labels. We have programs for Parkinson's patients, for Alzheimer's patients. As I said, we have programs that link us to end-of-life hostels, to the children's hospitals. We have many young people who just come to enjoy themselves in the museum. We have students of art. We are, in fact, we were born out of the Academy of Art. So we are still used by art students to learn the skills of painting, but we also invite our visitors to draw for themselves. And this is an activity that is very, very welcome. We have lots of silly experiments. In this case, it is a book house. It's a house that we fill with books and we take into the rooms. With books for young people that are related to the art on the walls. We have 2 visible restoration labs where we do restoration in public. We have visible storage areas where we don't have basements and musty old cellars. We actually have all our storage is visible. So you can also on appointment come and visit the storage areas. We use our shop as an educational area. The shop is built around the identities of people who were former directors. The woman on the left is Fernanda Wittgens, who was the first woman director in Italy. She was a director of Brera. On the right is Piero Fornisetti, who was a student at the Accademia, is now a very famous producer of porcelain. We have also our cafe is in the museum. That doesn't mean it's sitting attached to the museum. It is actually a part of the museum. You can see the artwork is very real and very on the wall. And the labels for the artwork, in fact, you see the Marina Marini at the end of the room. It's actually a bust of Fernanda Wittgens. This is called the Cafe Fernanda. This is a site for learning. The menu is linked to the collection. The labels are in the menu. So going to the cafe is as legitimate a visit to the museum as going to anywhere else. So I want to return to the argument I started earlier. And I raised the question of what if we're going to actually learn from COVID. And what we've learned is, I think, an extraordinary fact, which is the museum doesn't have to be limited to when it opens the doors. It can be open 24 hours a day because we can be online with valid museum experiences. But the question is, as I said, not what we can illustrate about what you could see anyway. But I think what we really have to look at is what you could never see. Even if you came every day at 9 in the morning and stayed till 6 at night, there are certain things that, of course, you are unable to see in the museum, but you can see online. One of those things we can do online is give you access to all the incredible imagery and study and research we do about the objects. We can give you access to people, to specialists, we can create special guided tours. We can do browsable books with hypertext and translations. We can do oral histories. We can create online an offer which is complementary to, which is, I would say, equal to, an equal partner of the museum in presence. Now, you can never, nobody is pretending that online will ever replace the experience of the art. On the contrary, I think that the attempts to illustrate it are always disappointing. I think showing digital pictures online just of the painting you could see in person are disappointing. But when I can see the ultraviolet images, the infrared, the pentimenti, That I can only do online. And that, I find, is something we can do to supplement the experience of the museum. So when we started to develop our online offer, we asked ourselves a question: what can we only do online? And we asked ourselves a second question, which is, what is it that makes a museum visit special? Why is a museum visit different than going to the cinema or going to a play or going to the ballet? And the answer is autonomy. The answer is that in all the time-based arts, so theater, cinema, ballet, opera, even literature, all the time-based arts, the creator of the narrative puts the visitor in a fixed position. You sit in a chair and Steven Spielberg tells you a story, or you sit in the chair and Jean-Luc Godard tells you a story. But effectively, you stay still and the content moves past you. Now, what makes a museum visit extraordinary is actually the content stays still and you move. And you move at your own speed. You can go backwards, you can go forwards, you can spend 10 minutes with one painting, you can spend 10 seconds with 10 paintings. You are in control of the experience. So this makes a museum experience qualitatively different than all the time-based arts. So our question to ourselves was, how could we combine the power of the time-based arts? Because we all know how strong a great film can be. And it's often very powerful because the creator can control the narrative. We know that's what we want, but we don't want to just show documentaries on our website. So we asked ourselves, what could we do to make our online documentaries more like a museum experience? And the answer for us was something called Brera Plus. Brera Plus, in fact, is a way of combining a traditional documentary with the possibility of stopping it and going in to explore deeper the content. So it's like a train ride. Instead of the train going from Paris to Budapest, you have the stops in between. So at any of the stops, you can get off and you can look at content more deeply. You can listen to interviews, you can read through books, you can see high resolution images. So effectively, what we've done is we've created a hybrid model of the documentary, with the power of a documentary, the power of storytelling, but also with the possibility of going inside and stopping and at your own rhythm, at your own speed, going in and exploring content. When you want to go back to the train, you get back on the train and you go to the next stop. If you don't want to get off at the next stop, you just keep going. So what we have is a fundamentally narrative process punctuated by possibilities of exploration which correspond to the museum experience. You can come back. A Brera Plus documentary, people come back to 3, 4, 5 times, just like a museum. A single visit should not exhaust a museum, which was one of the great dilemmas of the Blockbuster exhibition, is that blockbusters reduced museums to single visits. And this, I think, was a fundamental mistake. If COVID has had one positive effect, I hope it will have killed the Blockbuster as the main driver of museum activity. I think that that was a mistake from the time it was invented, and it remains a mistake. So the post-COVID museum is now, if we think of it this way, and we look at our museum's online offer as equally valid, but very different than the in-presence, then we can be open 24/7. And even pre-COVID, if you think about it, we were only open 30% of the time. Nobody was complaining. When the museums closed entirely, we suddenly had, in Italy at least, people in the streets saying, we want access to our museums. And he said, well, you never had real access to your museums. They were only open a very short time, from 9:30 in the morning till 6:30 at night, 6 days a week. So I think that this change of thinking about museums, if you can offer an equally valid online experience, it changes the way you have to think about the visitor. In fact, we have to eliminate the visitor. We don't have any more. As of September 15th, last year, 2020, we have had no visitors because we have replaced the ticket, which was a permission that you paid for to come into a building, with a subscription, with a card that gives you access to the building, so admission to the collections for 3 months, as many times as you want to come, and it gives you a year's access to the online content. So what you have now is you don't have visitors, you have users or members, if you wish, or stakeholders, if you want to be even more provocative, and you don't have tickets. We do not sell tickets. There is not a ticket. You cannot buy a ticket to Brera. When you purchase with 15 euros an object called a card, it is both. It is a subscription that gives you both access to the space and to the online content. Now, the really radical part of this is that if you buy something, you become a client and buy a ticket. If you buy an iPhone, you become a client. If you want to complain, Apple might listen to you. But if you buy a share in Apple, you have the right to participate in the governance of the organization. So if you are not buying a ticket, which only gives you access, but you're buying a membership, you have the right, and the museum has the obligation to listen to you. Doesn't have to do what you say, but your relationship to the museum is very different. What this means is that you have a direct link to your community that you didn't have before. We never had a direct link to our visitors. They came, they were counted, they paid their money, and everybody was happy except me. Now we have a legitimate group that we can have a shareholders meeting, we can have a stakeholders meeting, we can have a members meeting, and we can say that those people on Zoom, by the way, could actually participate in a board meeting, and the board could present its plans for the future, its collection strategy. It might hear from the public that its collection strategy are ignoring key groups in the city. There are several groups in Milan that are important, but largely ignored. Koreans, Syrians, in fact, Russians. They don't have a voice, but as members of the museum community, they do. So this, I think, in my opinion, at the end of my professional life, this is, I think, the direction museums have to take. Just as newspapers have stopped selling only physical copies and have gone to online subscriptions, I think that museums in 10 years will all be subscription organizations, not ticket-based organizations. I think that we have to be an institution linked to our community through membership. And these subscriptions, which parallels trends in other sectors, as I said, we're not inventing this, is the key to the museum's future. Thank you.